Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar. It's late night, and you know what? I have to make this video because I'm seeing Microsoft sweat some real bullets. Now, I've talked a lot about Microsoft, I've talked a lot about Valve, talked a lot about Steam Decks, talked a lot about gaming actually, but this is a passionate topic for me because honestly, I love competition. I want to start this video off by saying I don't want Windows to fail, okay? I don't like using it, I really don't like promoting it, but I always love when there's competition, okay? When there's more than one big guy in the pond, it's just better for everyone, okay? When both of these players are innovating, we win. So anyways, I made a video a couple days ago, and it was me basically detailing that, I really think Valve's SteamOS is actually dog walking Windows a little bit. So I recently installed SteamOS onto that Asus ROG Ally. I then later installed Bazzite, which is basically, the same thing except a more general distro of Linux. And, like me and other channels like Dave2D, we noticed that our devices, all right, just got better battery life. The frames were better on certain games. Okay, all because we just dropped an operating system. We basically gave our devices a digital version of Ozempic, and all of a sudden, these little tiny handheld gaming devices had an extra hour, 2 hours sometimes of battery life. The frames were better on certain games, of course, not every game. And it all really came down to the fact that when we got rid of Windows 11, all right, suddenly things started to look a little clearer. Now, I think it's because of this that, honestly, I think Microsoft probably looked at this and decided to reportedly cancel that Xbox handheld. Now, I think handheld consoles are great, okay? To be honest with you, if it wasn't for the Switch, if it wasn't for the Steam Deck, I don't think I would have played through, like, all of the JRPGs that I've gotten, okay? Now, I've played through games on my PlayStation, the Xbox, the goddamn PC even. But generally speaking, if I can get something in my hand, I don't care if it looks like 720p dog shit. I don't even care if it's 30 frames per second. Sometimes it's just cozy to play a game in the hand, pause it whenever I want, and come back to it whenever I want. So I don't really care who's doing that. Whoever provides that experience the best is all for me. Remember, I'm the same guy that before the Steam Deck, before the Switch, my most used system, I'm not joking, was the PSP. Bro, I used to game on this like a champ back in the day when I used to play, actually, is it dead or is it... Wait, how did it die? Did I just leave it on? That's crazy. Anyways, this was one of my favorite devices just because back in the day when I had the bigger, chunkier PSP, and this is before even the Vita, this is how I used to actually watch YouTube videos. Like, I had a hacked handheld system. I used to watch channels like the Nostalgia Critic, AVGN, a lot of it under the covers, when I was in bed. Just watching it on the YouTube, like, homebrew app, okay? Half the screen would be black and white and the other half would be colored, but I didn't care, okay? It was a cozy experience. But a lot of my favorite games on the PSP, games like Grand Theft Auto, Liberty City Story, Vice City Stories, heck, the Persona 3 Portable, all of these games, amazing titles. Handheld gaming pretty much was the only way I played games for a while, and I feel like I've kind of went back to that with things like the Steam Deck, with things like the Nintendo Switch. And honestly, I may not be a Windows fan, but if the Xbox handheld gave me better performance and battery life, even if it was with Windows 11, I probably would pick this up and actually unironically play games on this and probably buy from the Xbox store. It's just that enticing. So anyways, it turns out that apparently that Xbox handheld, and this apparently was like a leak of it, it was from like Asus, so the same guys that made the ROG, and that apparently ended up actually getting canceled. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that this device was ever even actually, like, seriously announced or maybe even seriously considered at Microsoft. Maybe it was just something they threw at a dartboard, so I don't want to, like, really get into the weeds of, supporting a device that may or may not have really even legitimately existed. But there's no shock in my mind that obviously with how handheld gaming is becoming popular because of things like the Switch, because of things like the Steam Deck, that Microsoft wasn't seriously considering it, and I don't doubt that even Sony isn't considering it. I think it's just a huge market that Nintendo kind of really tapped into super early on in a really powerful way, and everyone else is kind of just catching up in also their own little ways too. But obviously, I think what really was the catalyst was that Microsoft looked at again, how much stronger their competition was becoming, or how much performant it was becoming. And that was not something that was okay, all right? I think this was the bigger catalyst, right? Looking at the state of Windows 11 and comparing it to, again, its most closest OS competitors in the field of gaming. So according to the fellows over at Windows Central, according to them, workers will shift on fixing Windows 11 performance on handheld devices. There are devices like the Legion Go and Rogue Ally, the former of which now has a SteamOS variant that performs better than Windows. So basically, instead of making that handheld system, they're focusing on the next generation of consoles, as if this current generation is actually even worth buying. Not really, in my opinion. Just me being here. And ultimately, they're focusing on fixing Windows 11, which I actually think is the smart play to make. Look, I don't think it's a joke to anybody. Windows 11 is bloated, okay? It's like Jabba the goddamn Hutt walking around, okay? All right, just goddamn consuming resources. We can all agree on that. A fresh install of Windows 11 is going to be a lot more bloated than a fresh install of even the most bloated Linux operating system, I guess something like Linux Mint even, which doesn't come with all of the fat trimmed. And the reason for that is, obviously, over the last few years, I think we all can agree that Windows 11 has had so many unnecessary upgrades and additions that nobody is really asking for, okay? You know, a few days ago, I showed you guys how to debloat Windows with a few free scripts. And even though a lot of people may not recommend it because it might kill functionality, generally speaking, I have not used a Windows installation without any slight debloating for years now, just because you do get better performance. Even if it's not super amazing performance on really high-end hardware, for people that have budget systems, which I know a lot of you guys do. I know a lot of people have budget systems that, you know, are definitely aging, get performance increases, right? You can get an extra year, 2 years out of your life when you trim down Windows 11 to a useful degree, okay? When all you really need to do is play video games, you might not need features like AI, you might not need half the bloat that ships with Windows 11, so it's probably worth trimming it down to your heart's content just to get the better performance. Now, one thing that I think is very evident, I want to walk down history lane with you. This did not come out of the fact that Valve just suddenly wanted to be altruistic and make a competitor. Valve, years ago, this is back in like 2012, like haunted gaming some ordinary gamers days, Valve created what is known as the Steam Machine. So back in the day, there used to be these Alienware Steam Machines, which, again, in 2012, these were $749 US. Now, you can't buy these anymore because they don't make them. But this was the first progenitor of Valve's foray into Linux. So this is back when SteamOS was not Arch-based, it was Debian-based, which was a different kind of branch of Linux, so to speak, a different distribution tree. So again, when this came out of the digital primordial ooze, it basically was a Linux-based device that required developers, Valve included, to port their games specifically over to Linux, meaning that there was no translation layer. The developers had to write the game and port it over to the Linux operating system. Now, obviously, for a device that sold a fraction of what is the fraction PC space at the time, not every developer wrote their games over to Linux, okay? I think there was a few developers out there, like I think Deus Ex ended up getting a port, Alien Isolation ended up getting a port, Tomb Raider ended up getting a port, and obviously all of Valve's games. But it was not enough for somebody to consider purchasing this when they couldn't run 99% of their Steam library. Now, of course, Valve went down this road because back in the Windows 8 days, if you don't remember the Windows 8 days, it was the one with that really shitty tablet-like interface on the PC. Like, I don't know what the fuck Microsoft was thinking. But evidently, it pissed off Gabe Newell to the point where he considered it to be a disaster. And specifically, he considered it to be a disaster because of things like the Windows stores, right? So the Windows Store, he said, could dent the success of Valve's own marketplace, which was Steam. So according to Gabe Newell, who basically had said that we want to make it as easy as possible for the 2,500 games on Steam, of course, at the time, to run on Linux as well. And the reason why Valve wanted to do this was because They couldn't trust Microsoft, okay? If Microsoft could suddenly turn off the tap and prevent users from installing Steam and instead rely on the Microsoft Store, remember, they own the majority of, the Windows market. What else are you going to do at the time instead of buying a Windows PC? You go and buy a Mac, which even at the time wasn't the apples to orange, like apples to apple comparison, right? Like Mac systems, even though they're pretty awesome now, are still not gaming devices. If you're getting a gaming device, it's probably a Windows PC. So of course, Valve decided to go to the drawing board and they said, listen, if we can't get the developers to port their game over, what we can do is we can readjust our Linux strategy. So they wrote Valve Proton. They wrote the Proton software, which allows any of us now to purchase a game on Steam, even if it's for Windows. And through a software known as Wine, a translation layer, you can run Windows software on Linux. It translates all of these software calls on the fly. So it translates a Windows call to a Linux compliant POSIX call, which again, at that moment, means that you can run your big shiny Windows game on a Linux system. And for a developer, it's great because they don't have to port the game to Linux. All they have is a Windows version that just seamlessly works. So from my understanding, and I haven't tried this, but you can even pick up games like, Elden Ring, Night Rain, which just came out. Literally, I think it's just coming out. And provided the anti-cheat doesn't stop you, you can just play that Windows game entirely underneath Linux. And with a lot of community support now, you can also even modify these games. You can do whatever you want. So Valve basically made sure that down the road, they have some piece of software that will always keep them outside the control of Microsoft. Now, obviously, in the last couple days with other devices, they've made SteamOS general purpose, and they're going to release it, meaning that now, for the first time, gamers have a choice. They can either download a copy of Windows 11 from the store, or they can download SteamOS. And again, you have a choice. Remember, choice is good. Even if you don't want to switch to Linux, I think a lot of you guys can appreciate that it's good to have the choices. And if, in Valve's case, the choice means a smoother system that gives you better performance, better battery life even, then maybe it might convince people to switch over, because now you really don't have to deal with the bloated shit of Windows. Now, one of the things that I feel like Microsoft can really succeed on over here is if they port the Xbox system software. Now, for anybody that doesn't know, Xbox One, when it dropped, it had its controversy. But if you ask me, I think since 2013, Xbox has had the best software for gaming consoles in general since that day. I don't think PlayStation 4 and 5 has ever been as cool. I don't even think Nintendo Switch, I think that's just been its own boring state. I think when it comes to functionality, Xbox is probably the best system you can pick up. The amount of applications you can run, the amount of backwards compatibility you can run across multiple Xbox generations, all the way back to the original Xbox, and just the fact that you can run all of your software super smooth is crazy awesome. I've even made videos where I've said maybe Microsoft should take the extra step and allow gamers to run fucking Windows 11 on their actual Xboxes. So you, the gamer, can turn your little mid-range Xbox into an actual gaming PC for a very, 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 very competitive price. But the reason why I say porting this software over is that, generally speaking, Microsoft does some really cool shit in here. So I'm going to walk you through a bit of technical stuff. What makes this software so much better than Windows 11, personally, is that they do already trim off a fuck ton of the bloat. The way that this software works is through virtual machine technology. And I've talked a lot about virtual machine technology on my channel. Okay, I'm like the virtual machine fucking guy. So I've shown you guys how to make virtual machines on Linux. You can even pass graphic cards through them. But one of the things that I showed was me taking my RTX 4090 at the time and turning it into 32 RTX 4090s, at least virtually. So the way that I did this was through something known as Microsoft's Hyper-V technology. Now, Hyper-V is a Type 1 hypervisor, similar to Linux's KVM, where, again, it runs at the kernel level. So Microsoft's virtual machine technology allowed me, in using a few scripts that you can easily write and run, you can basically share a RTX 4090 between your host operating system and a virtual machine. So the reason why this is important to mention is the way that the Xbox works is that when you fire up an Xbox system and you see that main menu, what you're typically in is in a hypervisor, right? You're in Hyper-V. So every single one of those boxes, whether they be something like Netflix, or whether they be a old Xbox game, or something very recent, these are all different virtual machines that you can spin up. So have you ever wondered how the Xbox Quick Resume works? Like, you know that feature where you can just like open up any recent game and it just immediately puts you back where you left it? It's because of things like virtual machines, right? So when you run a virtual machine, you can just save the state. Much like when you're playing an emulated game, you can just go to File, Save State, and then you can walk away and come back and load that exact fucking point. That's exactly what Microsoft has done. Whenever you turn off a video game or you just leave it and you come back to it, all the system is doing is spinning up the virtual machine and saying, hey, we have an exact copy of the game's memory. Let's just load that back in and Bob's your uncle, you're back where you left off. It's something so cool that Microsoft does through Hyper-V and virtualization technology that Nintendo hasn't been able to replicate it. PlayStation hasn't been able to replicate it, and to be honest, until Valve decides to take a crack at it with things like KVM and GPU virtualization, they won't be able to take a crack at it either. These are all features that Microsoft has matured and has fucking developed, that if they decided, if they had done this years ago, and ported this version of the Xbox software over to these AMD-based handheld gaming systems, which I'm sure they can do. Remember, the Xboxes themselves are nothing more than standard off-the-shelf PC stuff with, you know, AMD-based APUs inside them, which is not so far off from these handheld gaming systems. Obviously, there are differences, but I'm sure that Microsoft could have easily ported this over, especially with the amount of resources that they have. Had we had the Xbox's system software over with all of the goodies that come on the Xbox itself, I honestly would probably switch over to their software just because it is genuinely very bloat-free in comparison to real Windows 11. So again, Microsoft's focusing on cleaning up Windows 11, which I think is a fucking noble goal. I think honestly at this point, they've probably been very embarrassed. I think honestly speaking, they're absolutely sweating bullets here. Simply due to the fact that, you know, in raw comparisons, right? Like when the performance comes out that Valve's version of Linux is running Windows software better than the official branded Windows operating system, I mean, that's gotta be embarrassing. So obviously they're going out of their way to optimize and fix up Windows 11, especially for these devices, because ultimately this is a battleground that I'm sure Microsoft absolutely wants to win, okay? Microsoft does not want to lose ground to a competitor in the space, a competitor known as Valve. You know, in things like the laptop space, when you look at things like the MacBook, ever since Apple switched over, there's a lot of people who used to be hardcore Windows-only laptop users like me. And honestly, switching over to the MacBooks was not something I did out of nowhere. It was something I did because they made better actual processors. They made the better hardware. So Microsoft's on a lot of fronts where they're actually being threatened. And look, you know, for as large as you think something is, remember, hubris will always take advantage of people that literally get too complacent, right? Like if Microsoft is getting too complacent in spaces like gaming consoles, handheld computers, laptops, who's to know down the road if Valve's SteamOS doesn't become so good that people who may not even be gamers, people who just want a cleaner system. Remember, Windows 10 is dying this year, and there's a lot of computers that do not even support Windows 11. What is stopping those people from switching over to a modern Linux kernel that respects their, I guess, old software or old hardware at this point, and gives them better performance because the system itself, the software, isn't as bloated as Microsoft's current offerings. I think at this moment in time, like we're actually seeing like Microsoft really be threatened on that software end. And I probably would never have seen it, but given the fact that all these things are culminating so quickly, it's just such an interesting time to see like the dynamics start to change a little bit, you know? Like there's more competition showing up, and for the first time, you can see that the complacency of Microsoft, where they've kind of been sitting here for like damn near over a decade, if not 2 decades, completely being at the top, and finally, for once, being so threatened, has kind of put them into the danger zone. Okay, they really need to get their shit together. Otherwise, it may not be too long that, forget Valve for a second. The stuff that Valve does with Linux bleeds into every distribution out there, right? And if there comes out a distribution that can actually challenge Microsoft on a compatibility level for not just games, but maybe even software, and it can be more efficient at the same time, it's pretty much over for companies like Microsoft. Or not over, but it's kind of over for the fact that Windows is so goddamn dominant. But ladies and gentlemen, yeah, I wanted to kind of yap about this because it's all developing so fast. And if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.